The young Navy SEAL looked at the ferry captain's navigation technique and froze. That specific approach pattern, that precise depth control, he'd only seen it in classified submarine warfare manuals. His team leader whispered, "That's not a ferry captain. That's a sub-driver." Welcome to Daily Story. Before we dive into this extraordinary tale of hidden expertise and underwater secrets, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button to join our community. The San Juan Islands ferry system connected dozens of small communities scattered across the waters of Puget Sound, carrying commuters, tourists, and supplies through some of the most challenging maritime conditions on the West Coast. The MV Island Runner was one of the smaller vessels in the fleet, capable of carrying 85 passengers and 20 vehicles through narrow channels where tidal currents could shift a boat off course in seconds. Captain Sarah Mitchell had operated the Island Runner for 15 years, making the same route between Friday Harbor and Anacortes 6 times daily. At 45, she had the weathered hands and steady gaze of someone who had spent decades reading water conditions, but she carried herself with a precision that went beyond typical maritime experience. Her passengers saw her as the reliable ferry captain who always arrived on schedule, regardless of weather or sea conditions. The tourists called her Captain Sarah, and appreciated her friendly but professional demeanor. Local commuters trusted her completely. She had never missed a scheduled run in 15 years, never had a safety incident, and could navigate the treacherous waters around Deception Pass in conditions that kept other captains at dock. What her passengers didn't know, what the Washington State ferry system couldn't have guessed from her employment background, was that Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy, had spent 18 years as one of America's most elite submarine officers. She had commanded nuclear attack submarines through the deepest waters of the Pacific, conducted classified missions that took her beneath the polar ice cap, and navigated underwater terrain that appeared on no civilian charts. Her transition from submarine commander to ferry captain had been part of a carefully planned retirement. After 18 years of underwater operations that required absolute precision and split-second decision-making, Sarah had chosen work that used her maritime skills without the constant pressure of military command. Operating a ferry was still challenging navigation, but her passengers were families and commuters rather than torpedoes and depth charges. Sarah lived alone in a small house overlooking the water on San Juan Island, where she could watch the ferry traffic and weather patterns that determined her daily work schedule. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet woman who maintained her property with military precision and could often be seen studying nautical charts on her back porch. The house was comfortable but spartanly furnished, with one wall devoted to advanced navigation equipment that most ferry captains wouldn't need. She monitored underwater topography, current patterns, and marine traffic with instruments that could track objects far below the surface. To casual observers, it looked like the hobby equipment of a serious boating enthusiast. Sarah had found peace in the predictable rhythms of ferry operations. Each day brought familiar challenges, changing weather conditions, mechanical problems, and the complex task of maneuvering a large vessel through crowded waterways. She helped island residents maintain their connection to the mainland, work that served communities without involving classified missions or strategic operations. The morning of March 15th started like any other spring day in the islands. Sarah completed her pre-departure inspection of the Island Runner, reviewed weather conditions and tidal charts, and began loading passengers for the 7:30 a.m. run to Anacortes. Among the usual mix of commuters and tourists, she noticed a group of 12 men who carried themselves differently, military bearing evident in their posture and the way they scanned their surroundings. The men wore civilian clothes but moved as a unit, taking positions throughout the ferry that provided optimal sight lines and quick access to exits. Sarah recognized the patterns immediately: special operations personnel conducting what appeared to be a training exercise or surveillance operation. During the crossing, Sarah navigated through a section of water known locally as the Narrows, a channel where strong currents and underwater rock formations created hazardous conditions. The approach required precise timing and specific positioning to avoid being swept onto the rocks by tidal flows. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Thompson, the youngest member of the SEAL team, was standing near the bridge when he observed Sarah's navigation technique. What he saw made him stop mid-conversation with his teammates. Sarah was maneuvering the ferry using approach patterns that Thompson had only seen in classified submarine warfare manuals. Her timing for depth control adjustments, her use of current vectors to maintain position, and her precise calculation of drift compensation were techniques taught exclusively to nuclear submarine officers. Thompson immediately moved to where his team leader, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, was observing the crossing. "Chief, you need to watch how this ferry captain is navigating." Rodriguez joined Thompson at the observation deck and watched Sarah guide the ferry through the challenging waters. After 5 minutes of observation, Rodriguez whispered the words that would change Sarah's carefully constructed civilian life. "That's not a ferry captain. That's a sub-driver." Rodriguez approached the bridge area where Sarah was completing the crossing. As a veteran of multiple submarine operations, he recognized expertise that couldn't be learned from surface vessel experience. "Captain Mitchell, that's impressive navigation through the Narrows. Mind if I ask where you learned to handle currents like that?" Sarah completed her docking procedures before responding. She had recognized the SEAL team immediately, but hoped to avoid drawing their attention. "Experience, mostly. These waters require precision." "Ma'am, I've been on submarines for 12 years. That wasn't a surface navigation technique. You were using depth compensation and current analysis methods that are classified for submarine operations." Sarah secured the ferry and dismissed her crew for the turnaround break, then turned to face Rodriguez directly. She had spent 15 years avoiding this conversation, but her skills had finally been recognized by someone qualified to identify them. "Chief Rodriguez, what brings your team to the San Juan Islands?" "Training exercise, ma'am. But now I'm more interested in understanding how a civilian ferry captain knows submarine warfare navigation." Sarah looked across the water toward the Olympic Mountains, where Navy submarines regularly conducted training exercises in deep water beyond civilian radar range. "Chief, some skills transfer between different types of vessels." "Not these skills, ma'am. You were compensating for underwater currents using techniques I've only seen in Los Angeles-class attack submarines. That level of precision requires sonar data that civilian vessels don't have access to." Rodriguez was joined by his team leader, Lieutenant Commander James Walsh, who had been briefed on the conversation. "Captain Mitchell, we'd like to speak with you privately about your navigation techniques." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the ferry terminal's administrative office with 3 Navy SEALs who had correctly identified her as a former submarine commander. Her civilian cover had lasted 15 years, but 18 years of underwater expertise couldn't be completely hidden from experts who knew what to look for. "Commander Mitchell," Lieutenant Commander Walsh began, using her former rank, "we've run a discreet background check. Your service record shows 18 years of submarine operations, including command of the USS Virginia during classified Pacific missions." Sarah had been expecting this conversation since the day she retired, but she had hoped it would never come. "Lieutenant Commander, I've been retired for 15 years. Whatever you think you observed, I'm just a ferry captain now." "Ma'am, with respect, what we observed was submarine warfare navigation being executed with civilian equipment. That suggests capabilities that go far beyond ferry operations." Chief Rodriguez opened a tablet displaying recent intelligence reports. "Commander, we're tracking increased submarine activity from hostile nations in Pacific Northwest waters. Chinese and Russian subs are conducting operations that suggest they're mapping underwater approaches to major naval installations." "What does that have to do with me?" "Ma'am, you know these waters better than anyone. You've been navigating them daily for 15 years, and you understand underwater topography that most surface captains never encounter. We need someone who can identify submarine signatures using civilian vessels and equipment." Sarah understood immediately. They wanted her to conduct covert submarine detection operations using her ferry as cover. It was exactly the kind of mission that would end her peaceful civilian life and return her to the classified world she had left behind. "Lieutenant Commander, I left submarine operations for good reasons. I've built a different life here." "We understand that, ma'am. But Chinese submarines have been detected approaching Puget Sound, and we believe they're conducting intelligence gathering that could compromise every naval installation from Bremerton to Whidbey Island." Lieutenant Commander Walsh showed Sarah satellite images of underwater contacts that had been detected near her regular ferry routes. "These signatures appear near your crossings 3 times per week. Either it's an incredible coincidence, or hostile submarines are using ferry schedules to time their surveillance operations." Sarah studied the intelligence data while considering the implications. If foreign submarines were using her ferry route as cover for intelligence operations, then her peaceful civilian work was already compromised. The question was whether she would help counter the threat or continue pretending it didn't involve her. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Install discrete sonar monitoring equipment on the island runner and report any underwater contacts during your regular ferry operations. No changes to your schedule, no additional responsibilities. Just use your expertise to identify threats that our standard systems might miss." Sarah looked through the office window at the island runner, where passengers were boarding for the return trip to Friday Harbor. Families with children, elderly commuters, tourists exploring the islands, people who depended on ferry service and had no idea that their transportation might be providing cover for foreign intelligence operations. "If I agree to this, I want guarantees about passenger safety. No operations that could put civilian lives at risk." "Agreed, ma'am. This is purely intelligence gathering using your existing ferry operations. And I maintain my civilian status and employment. No return to active military duty.
Understood.
You'd be a civilian contractor providing specialized consultation. Sarah made her decision based on the same principles that had guided 18 years of submarine command: protect American interests and ensure the safety of those under her responsibility. I'll need secure communication equipment and real-time intelligence support. If I'm going to detect submarines in these waters, I need to know what I'm looking for. 6 months later, Captain Sarah Mitchell was still operating the MV Island Runner on its regular schedule between the San Juan Islands, but now her ferry was equipped with sophisticated sonar systems that could detect and classify underwater contacts throughout Puget Sound. Her passenger manifest remained the same: commuters, tourists, and local residents traveling between the islands, but her actual passengers now included the most advanced underwater surveillance equipment available to civilian contractors. Sarah had identified 17 foreign submarine contacts during her regular ferry operations, providing intelligence that led to the interdiction of multiple espionage missions targeting Pacific Northwest naval installations. Her navigation expertise, combined with intimate knowledge of local waters and daily presence in strategic locations, had made her one of the most valuable intelligence assets in the region. She protected American waters while maintaining the civilian ferry service that connected island communities. Sarah had learned that retirement from military service didn't mean abandoning national defense. It meant finding innovative ways to use specialized knowledge to protect the country from threats that traditional systems couldn't detect. The ferry captain who passengers trusted to get them safely between the islands was also the submarine warfare expert who ensured that hostile underwater activities didn't threaten the naval installations that protected the entire Pacific coast. Sometimes the most effective defense comes from people who understand both the surface and the depths, who can operate in plain sight while detecting threats that hide beneath the waves. Sarah Mitchell had discovered that true service meant using your expertise wherever it was needed most, whether commanding nuclear submarines in deep ocean operations or detecting enemy subs from the bridge of a civilian ferry. So now I ask you, have you ever known someone whose professional skills seemed to go far beyond what their current job required? Someone who handled routine responsibilities with a precision that suggested much more demanding previous experience? Share their story in the comments below. Tell us about the hidden experts in your life, the ones who bring specialized knowledge to ordinary jobs and make everyone safer because of their presence. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that protection often comes from the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button and join the Daily Story community. We're here to honor the maritime experts, the underwater warriors, the people who keep our waters safe while serving communities that never know the full extent of their protection. Thank you for watching, and remember, the next time you ride a ferry or see a boat captain navigating challenging waters, look a little closer. You might be traveling with someone who has spent their career ensuring that American waters remain secure from threats that most of us never even consider.